Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast. Today we're diving into CBD. It seems to be the hot topic of the year in 2018 and probably will continue to be so for the next couple of years. Today's guest, Evan Demarco, is an expert on CBD and nutrition, how that applies to you. He's got some really good insights into understanding the data that actually exists. And now I want to be transparent. Like, I don't advocate this stuff. And the data seems to be very conflicting, right? I hear some people saying one thing, other people saying another thing. I think it has massive potential for certain demographics. I don't think it's a panacea, as we talk about in the show. I'm willing to be a guinea pig. I have been a guinea pig. I've tried it, and it seems to make a difference, but I don't feel as though it's the answer for everybody, right? So we talk about in the show, if you have anxiety and stress, you do not have a CBD deficiency. You have something wrong in your life that needs to be addressed. And I highly advocate using that stress, using that anxiety, using that worry as an awareness, and say thank you for that stress, thank you for that anxiety, and say, well, you're making me aware of something that needs to change in my life. How do I fix it? I don't know. But in the meantime, maybe I can take something to calm myself down so that I can actually take action, because I know stress and anxiety can be crippling for some people. And, myself included, when I'm stressed, things just don't go as well, right? You don't have the ability to focus. You don't have the ability to work. Your productivity goes out the toilet, and this becomes a slippery slope. So I think there's definitely a benefit here, potentially decreased inflammation, potentially decreased stress, as Evan Demarco says. And I don't know that for sure, but he's going to send me the data if there is some. Now, I know hundreds of people who advocate this stuff and are, full bore behind it. Who knows? It sounds like it's got massive potential, but don't take it from me. Listen to the experts. And the first one we're going to interview this week is Evan Demarco on CBD, combining with a few other special ingredients. And I hope you guys enjoy the show. As always, this podcast is fueled by reviews. This podcast is fueled by subscriptions. So if you're not already subscribed, I've massively appreciate it. And if you enjoy the show and you want it to keep going, like I do, I'd really appreciate you guys head over to iTunes, leave us a review, because that's a little what fuels it. The more reviews we get, the more subscriptions we get, the higher we get placed on iTunes, and that gets more people to see it, allows us to get more cool guests, which is awesome, because I want to interview the best people in the world. I want them to give you all the best information. It's not always easy to get these people, right? So the higher we get on iTunes, the more people actually look for us, which allows us to get the top experts, the top researchers, and gives us the credibility to bring you the best information in the world. I'm going to do my best to continue to improve my interview skills for you, because I enjoy it. It's awesome stuff, and I'm learning a ton. I hope you are too. Enjoy the show, and when you're done, share it with at least one person you know will love it. Take care, guys. Yeah, man. So I obviously looked through your resume and learned a little bit about you, but I'd love for you to just tell me more about you. So like I said, is it CBD that's kind of your interest, or is it more the nutritional aspect of stuff?
No, it's definitely more than nutritional. I grew up, interestingly enough, with CBD. I kind of had a really negative reaction when I first heard about it. And I think that was really systemic of my sports background. So I grew up in a small town called Greeley, Colorado.
Okay.
If you've never heard of Greeley, Colorado, it's predominantly famous for being one of ConAgra's biggest feedlots. So my high school was about 3 to 4 miles from a giant moving pasture of stink. And it was horrible, right? The wind would blow, and on the bad days, the wind would blow and you'd smell it. The really bad days are when they would burn all of the carcasses. So you can only imagine what that was like.
Right.
So sports was really kind of my catalyst to get out of, Greeley, Colorado. I was really excited about the potential to utilize sports as my ticket out of this small town. So I did everything under the sun. I worked out. I played every sport I could. I kind of focused on the sports that I thought would be a real asset to my exit strategy. And as a result of that, CBD or hemp or weed, that was a surefire way to not have my exit strategy come true.
Sure.
It was a drug.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, kind of looking back, it was kind of funny, right? So after I did all of that, I spent all of that time just, becoming a academic geek as well as a sports, I'd like to say I was good at sports. I ended up at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado. So, best laid plans of mice and men. Played baseball, ended up tearing up my shoulder, so my time there was short lived. But it really taught me the value of athletics, of academics, of really kind of pursuing my dreams. And um, so after all of that, kind of fast forward 20 years, and I'm in the health and wellness industry, and I'm developing products for all of these different companies. And at the time, I was really focused on omegas, as I still am. Big fan of omegas, working on prenatal vitamins, a bunch of different omega products. And then CBD starts to come into the conversation. And especially because the extraction technology, the manufacturing technology for omegas is the same as CBD. So we started looking at it kind of as this, peripheral ancillary business opportunity. But as I said, I had a real visceral reaction to it, right? I'm like, that's a drug. There's no way I want to get, I don't want to put that in my body. And my rule of thumb is I won't develop something that I wouldn't take myself. So it took me about, I would say 6 months of really looking at the research to, just to tear into it and say, hey, this is a product that makes sense. It's not a drug. It actually, there's some incredible therapeutic benefits for this. So we can talk a lot more about that. But yeah, that was kind of the road to my understanding of CBD.
Very cool. I grew up with very much the same paradigm, right? It's like drugs are bad. Drugs are going to fry your brain. I don't want anything to do with that stuff. So when it started to come out, I was completely resistant to CBD, knew nothing about it. I thought it was just basically, people are looking for an excuse to get high, and that's basically the only thing it's good for. But I truthfully don't know enough about it right now to make any comments as to whether it's great or bad. And people are framing it as this panacea of everything good and decreasing inflammation and endocannabinoids and all these other things. And I honestly don't know enough about the pharmacology to say, yes, this is actually legitimate. I know there's tons of research coming out now that says it's great. Everyone says it's going to decrease pain and inflammation, but there's so much misinformation around, the strains and the full spectrum versus, one specific strain. And honestly, I don't think there's anybody that I've met yet who's given me a clear, full explanation as to what actually is right, what is necessary, how much THC, if any, does it have to be full spectrum? Can it be from hemp? What are we looking at here as far as speaking specifically to CBD? What do I need to know?
Great. Well, great question. So let's break it down to the basics, right? So CBD is one of about 113 unique phytocannabinoids. And it is the most prevalent within those phytocannabinoids, along with THC. So outside of THC and CBD, which are completely antagonistic to each other, you have all of these other ancillary phytocannabinoids. So those two are antagonistic of each other, which is interesting unto itself, because if you look back in the history of CBD, if you look back in the history of hemp, this is where it gets really fascinating, right? 10,000 years ago, China, 5,000 years ago, India. This was one of the biggest medicinal compounds that we used. George Washington grew this stuff in his front yard. At one point in the United States history, it was illegal to not grow hemp. And that was because of, the ropes for fiber, the fibers for ropes, clothing, all of the things that the hemp plant is good for outside of these phytocannabinoids. So, it really became demonized, right? It was in the cotton industry really kind of forced hemp out because they wanted that commercial aspect of it. And then in the 1930s, in this weird reverse immigration policy, basically the law was written in California that said Mexican men were coming across the border smoking marijuana, which was the Spanish word for this plant, getting high and soliciting sex from white women. So it literally became this, export opportunity where we could, in California, export migrants back across the border. That ruling was later overturned in the United States, but then in the 1960s, it became a Schedule I drug for the DEA, which, if you really look at that, that's on the same level as cocaine, heroin, opium. So let's talk a little bit about how this stuff works. And it does impact, when we separate these things out, the CBD, the THC, the full spectrum phytocannabinoids, what it does is it impacts something called the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is made up of CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors, located throughout your body. The CB1 receptors predominantly are located in your brain. CB2 receptors are predominantly located in your body. Now, full spectrum phytocannabinoids, which is something that I highly recommend, they don't actually impact the endocannabinoid endocannabinoid system directly. It's a rather indirect response. But with that indirect response, we see a whole host of things, potential things that it seems to work for. And that's like appetite, mood, pain, all of these different things. So
can you take a moment to define full spectrum? Like, does that mean it has to include a particular ratio of THC, or is it just all of the, your 131 phytocannabinoids? I'm not sure exactly what the full spectrum would be.
Full spectrum is just that. It's just the full spectrum of phytocannabinoids. So it's
meaning
not
all
a specific
113.
Yep, all 113. And what we're seeing right now legally is this potential, or this, the way legally in the United States it has to be sold is as full spectrum. So
now I've heard the opposite. I've heard that it can't be sold full spectrum. It only works if it's full spectrum, but I've heard that it's illegal in particular states, I guess, to have it as full spectrum. Again, I'm hearing conflicting info from tons of different places.
Oh yeah, and that's the beauty of this part, because no one really knows.
Nobody has any idea.
So to sell a product, there's a couple different ways that it can be sold, right? So CBD in specific states where CBD has been legalized, like Colorado, Washington, California, you can buy whatever you want there. THC, CBD, marijuana, whatever it is that you want. Right now, to legally sell a product across state lines, there's a couple things that have to happen. THC has to be below 0.3%. The full spectrum phytocannabinoids have to come from a foreign source and only come from the stalks and stems of the plant. And to sell it across state lines, it cannot be labeled as CBD. It has to be labeled as full spectrum phytocannabinoids. So that is the law as it exists right now. Now we have the hemp farm bill, which is supposed to be voted on any time now, which could change all of this. And at that point, then it would make it legal to sell domestically cultivated full spectrum phytocannabinoids across state lines. What we're finding out, though, is there's going to be a big battle royale. It's going to be the epic celebrity death match of big pharma versus the dietary supplement industry. Epidiolex, which is a product from the GW Pharmaceutical Company, was approved recently to treat childhood epilepsy, and that's a isolate of CBD. And the GW Corporation has indicated that they have no intent of going after the dietary supplement industry for CBD. But there's three or four other new drug applications pending with the FDA for CBD or CBD isolates, and you can bet with $3 billion estimate market share by 2020 on the line that big pharma is going to say, nope, this is a drug. We need to control it. We need to be able to dispense it. Dietary supplement industry is saying full spectrum phytocannabinoids are a plant. I can get the same thing from cinnamon or garlic or cloves. I just can't get as much of it from that as I can from hemp. So much like the red yeast rice levazastatin issue that came out a couple of years ago, where we found that there was this naturally occurring levazastatin from red yeast rice, all of a sudden these red yeast rice packages started to claim that. Big pharma said, nope, that's our product. And so you had a great legal celebrity death match. Of course, big pharma won. So right now, my big goal in all of this is really to educate the average consumer that full spectrum phytocannabinoids does include CBD, does include all of the remaining 112, and that full spectrum, as it sits now, is legal. You can buy it. There are some issues as far as like Amazon or where you have to buy it. So you have to be a little bit more discerning. But that's the legal landscape right now. And once we get past that, then we get to talk about what it does.
All right. So CBD is just one of these 113. It's the most beneficial one in our estimate?
In our estimate. And the reality is when you look at full spectrum, the CBD accounts for anywhere between 92 and 95% of that full spectrum. So all of these other, the remaining 112 are so insignificant in that spectrum that it's hard for us to ascertain what exactly those do. But one of the fascinating components of the potential of this farm bill passing is our ability to really do the research, right? Can we pull these 113 things apart and then put them back together for indication-specific response? We know that CBD is great for pain, for appetite, for all of these different things. But if we include some of these other ones in there, can we have very unique formulations that address certain things? ADHD is a perfect example, right? I mean, CBD is really being looked at right now for that. Sleep, that's a huge one. We have so many issues with sleep right now in our society that, can we create a very specific CBD blend that deals with sleep? And to kind of go back to something you said earlier, Ben, I'll be the first one. The pro CBD people out there are going to hunt me down and lynch me for this one, but it is not a panacea, not even close. And we need to stop thinking of it as such. It is one component in a toolbox that is all necessary for health and wellness. I've heard the same thing, right? It's like CBD, it cures cancer, it'll regrow your hair. If you're missing a left testicle, it'll help grow that back. It's like some of the stuff that I've heard out there.
Right.
It is not that. It is just one element it's one tool in the toolbox.
Hey, man, I'm definitely anti, panacea solution. Like when we say, we need to use this for sleep. Well, we know that poor sleep isn't a CBD deficiency, right? So why don't we actually get to the root of the problem and determine what's actually causing the lack of sleep rather than just masking the problem? Because obviously a lot of people lack sleep, but part of what my mission is to do here is give people a skill set, give them a toolbox so they can kind of look at, hey man, how do I actually fix the problem that's causing me to have poor sleep? And a lot of times that's obviously stress, and that's our environment, and that's all these things, and giving them reasonable ability to mitigate those internal stressors that are happening. Just, this massive amount of sympathetic arousal that we have, and giving them some parasympathetic inputs. So coming back a little bit, we started talking a little bit about the actual mechanism of CBD, working on the CB1 and CB2 receptors. And you kind of glossed over saying that CBD doesn't actually work on the CBD1 and CB2 receptors?
The full spectrum phytocannabinoids work indirectly. So, the best way to look at your endocannabinoid system is, it's kind of the lock and key mechanism, right? So your CB1 and CB2 receptors are these locks that exist all over your body. And in a normal, healthy environment or a normal environment, certain elements, certain vitamins, minerals, amino acids will pair directly with that lock, and then you create that bond. What we know is that CBD doesn't actually fit into that lock. It kind of impacts right around it. And so we have this indirect response or indirect stimulation of the endocannabinoid system from full spectrum phytocannabinoids. And so part of the research that we're starting to look at, part of the understanding of how all of this works is, what does that indirect methodology like? What is that indirect mode of action? And can we stimulate a direct mode of action through some type of change, alteration in that spectrum, that full spectrum? Can we increase a certain constituent part of that full spectrum phytocannabinoid to create that direct response versus the indirect?
Very interesting, man. Hey guys, I interrupt the podcast to bring you a special message from Four Sigmatic. So you guys know I've been getting behind Four Sigmatic because I love them, I use them, and I think you should too. So I use cordyceps all the time. Like I've told you, I've used it for its endurance benefits for anybody looking to improve your cardiovascular condition. I'm also, as we speak about reishi, if you haven't ever used reishi, if you ever get sick, if you're ever having a low immune system, if you're ever stressed, if you're ever burning the candle at both ends, reishi is an absolute necessity to add to your repertoire because it's going to be a great immune booster. It's literally the type of thing where I'll take 3 grams when I feel myself getting a little run down. If I didn't sleep well for a couple of days, if I'm traveling, if I'm on airplanes, I'm going to throw a little bit of reishi in there and feel like an absolute rock star within 24 hours. Literally, it's replaced vitamin C in my diet. Some people have their go-to for the immune protocol. And for me, that's reishi, which you can find at foursigmatic.com/muscle. And if you use the code muscle at Four Sigmatic, you get 15% off now. Enjoy the rest of the show. How relevant is THC in this whole thing? So like I said briefly, I've heard experts say that it's useless without THC. I've heard experts say that, you want a very low amount of THC. What is the interaction? So obviously I can understand you say, oh yes, you need THC in there. You don't need THC in there, but do you know anything about like the mechanism that makes one activate the other?
Yeah. And so if you really look at, this is great, right? Because now we talk about bioengineering. We talk about all of the stuff that we're doing to these plants, the hemp plants, the cannabis sativa. And so if you look back in time, the ratio of THC to CBD was pretty consistent, right? And so they were somewhat antagonistic of each other. You could get high off of THC. And for your viewers who don't know, THC is the psychedelic component of cannabis sativa. That's the thing that's going to get you high, give you the munchies. You're going to be at 7-Eleven at 2:00 in the morning looking for a corn dog type of thing. That's what THC does. CBD does not have any of that psychoactive component, right? So you don't have to worry about those elements when you take CBD. 200 years ago, those things were antagonistic of each other. They kind of canceled each other out. Now what's happening, though, is we're bioengineering these plants. So THC concentrations are so much higher. Instead of 5 or 10%, now they're 30, 40, 50%. So the real answer to this is that no one knows. And we can say that you're an expert. Anyone can say that they're an expert. But the reality is when we look at what we've done to these plants, how we've bioengineered them, we have no freaking clue what we're doing as far as the endocannabinoid system. We're doing the same with CBD, right? We're bioengineering higher concentrations of CBD. So where does it really work? The answer is we don't know. Personally, I'm not a big fan, and I think it's systemic from my sports background, of THC. I don't like that feeling. I've done it. I'll be the first to admit it. And I end up just staring at a wall for 2 hours. I'm not a big fan of it. I know that a lot of people are. I know that a lot of people really utilize it and seem to claim some significant benefit from that. I think personally, if you stick with full spectrum phytocannabinoids at the THC below the 0.3%, you're going to find the most synergistic benefit for your health and wellness goals.
Sorry, so THC below 0.3%?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Okay. We talked a little bit about what people are experiencing when they're taking THC, CBD. Can you just break it down for us? Like, we talked about inflammation. We talked about potentially calming effects. I'm sure the list is longer. What have you experienced, or what do you see in the research?
So the big one, I think, is kind of modulating some of the the biomarkers for stress. So lower cortisol levels, lower prolactin levels, C-reactive.
Like we've actually seen data that's showing that it's decreasing cortisol.
Yep.
Okay.
And so what we talk about, and I think let's kind of go back to sleep, right? So
I'd love to see that data, man. If you have access to it, I'd love to connect to it and link to it in the show notes.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to send it over to you.
Because that's interesting to me. That's legitimately interesting, right? Like I hate this idea of like, take this, you'll feel better subjectively, right? If I see objective data saying, hey, this is decreasing cortisol, that's very, very powerful.
Yeah. And so it's funny because I talk a lot about this product and I talk a lot about lifestyles. So when I'm doing these discussions, one of the things I always talk about first thing in the morning is like, hey, biological functions aside, what is the first thing you do when you get up in the morning? And most people are like, I check my phone. Right?
Sure.
Yeah. So now all of a sudden it's like your boss has emailed you. You've got issues at work. You're checking Facebook. It's you've got FOMO. FOMO is now I think like a clinical diagnosis.
Sure. Or when you check Facebook and Instagram, there's usually something bad going on. People are posting something bad in the world that just happened, and like stress, right?
Exactly. So then you that starts out your day. We don't have patterns that allow us to ease into our day like we once did. Whether it's sitting around and drinking a cup of coffee and reading the newspaper or whatever, we've broken our patterns to the point that phone, that blue light activation, all of this is instantly ramping up cortisol. We're seeing homocysteine, elevated homocysteine, elevated C-reactive protein. So then you go to work, right? And we don't have the same lifestyle that we did 30, 40 years ago. I mean, it is fast paced. You got to be Johnny on the spot, constant stimulation, as you spoke about earlier. Emails, cell phones, phone calls, all of these things. Then you go home, try to unwind a little bit. But then I ask the question, it's like, well, you're getting ready for bed. What's usually the last thing you do? Like, check my phone.
Sure.
So again, blue light activation, all of the stress that comes from, social media, whatnot. So it's no wonder that our sleep patterns are completely disrupted, that we're completely, out of whack. I've literally talked to people who wake up in the middle of the night and check Instagram. Like, that's insane to me. Like, that's an addiction. So right now, the research is really calling this the stress sleep cycle. How are these elevated biomarkers of stress impacting sleep? And the limited amount of clinical research, even though there has been some great research that I feel has been done, has shown that we can decrease these biomarkers of stress throughout the day. So you're not going into your nighttime routine completely amped up, unable to sleep. Now, is that a fix? No, it's a Band-Aid for a broken leg. But I think that as the pace of life has evolved and people are not necessarily always willing to change their patterns, this might be a solution to at least help offset a lot of the damage that we're doing and kind of the lifestyles that we're leading.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you brought that up, man, because I'm the guy leading the charge against the stupidity, behind checking your phone in the morning and, watching TV late until 8 hours in the night. Like, it's ridiculous. And it's literally setting you up for poor sleep, obesity, poor performance. And people just don't get it, right? Everyone blames everything outside of themselves rather than taking ownership for their life. It's like, oh, I don't have the genetics to look great. I don't have the genetics to be a smart person, have a great memory. And I believe it's everything to do with your environment. It's everything to do with manipulation of your stress, manipulation of your blue light. I think people don't realize like how much control they actually have over it, but it's great to be able to have a solution in the short term that allows us to like bring ourselves down into, somewhat of a balance to now actually be able to think clearly and then maybe take an objective approach to what we're doing. So one thing you've done that's really interesting to me is combining CBD with some other ingredients, particularly omega-3s. And you brought that up briefly, like how they have the similar extraction process. Talk to me a little bit about why you and your company chose to combine those two ingredients and what benefits you're seeing.
Great question. So the product that we're talking about is called Omax Stress Remedy. And what I really looked at was two different things. I wanted research, right? I'm a research junkie. I want the proof to be in the pudding. I hate anecdotal, and the problem with the supplement industry is everything's anecdotal, right? Take this and you'll feel better. Take this and you'll have massive gains.
For what, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So there has been some really interesting clinical research done on the impacts of polyunsaturated fatty acids on the endocannabinoid system. So I'm like, oh, okay, now we've got this multi-mode of action, this dual mode of action. I really think that most people are deficient in their omega-3s. So I wanted a good high concentrate omega-3 that we could blend with this. So we're addressing the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio problem with this particular product. And then the other thing that I actually blended with this was L-theanine. So I'm looking at, as we're kind of modulating stress throughout the day, as we're hoping to help set people up for better sleep, we're actually helping separate out those alpha and theta brainwaves so people can get into that deeper REM sleep. They can enjoy a little bit more of a recovery sleep session versus that, tossing and turning all night long. So those three ingredients really kind of came together in this fusion that allowed us to look at all of the clinical research of each one of the constituent ingredients and then pair them together so that we knew that this was going to have a systemic impact. It really is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Very, very cool, man. So no particular unique synergistic benefit of having the omega-3s and CBD other than maybe they're working on a similar response.
They are working on a similar response, but you also have, I think, a lot of the other benefits that come with CBD. And that's, I look at inflammation resolution, right? It's the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. I think right now in America, the average is considered to be about 20-1. So most Americans are walking around in this hyper pro-inflamed state. Sure. Now, your viewers, I'm guessing, are probably a little bit more in shape than that. Their ratios are probably not that high. But when you start looking at, recovery time, getting the most out of your workouts, getting the most out of your post-workout, recovery, there's a lot of research on omegas and BCAA supplementation, really addressing sarcopenia or age-related muscle protein breakdown. So I like that synergy there. I like the fact that these products are really addressing some of the environmental factors which are leading to worse recovery post-workout. I mean, we're seeing that. It's in whether that's plastic toxicity, whether that's, environmental damage, whatever we want to say. It just seems that like sarcopenia was something we used to talk about when people were in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Now we're seeing it like in the 30s. And it's crazy to me. That's sedentary lifestyle. That's all of these things that, I think obviously you're a huge proponent of fixing, but like, how do we utilize supplementation as another tool in the toolbox to address some of these issues? So looking at omegas in that respect, and then pairing that with CBD or full spectrum phytocannabinoids, and then the theanine really gives us this just, I'm trying to circle the wagons around a person's health and wellness, give them the most bang for their buck, shall we say.
Sure. Yeah. And you speaking about a listener, like, although I do agree my listener would definitely be much more advanced than the average person, a lot of people listening to the show seem to be kind of sitting around their genetic default, right? Most people end up sitting, somewhere in and around what their body's meant to be. Not very many people are actually taking their body well beyond what their genetic set point is. And that's kind of the objective here, right? And it's like, we're born to be this way. My dad looked this way. My mom looked this way. Well, how do I actually push well beyond that? So this is really what we're trying to do. We're trying to identify those things that allow me to be super physiological, right? Or superhuman ultimately. I'm looking for those things that allow me to, calm my autonomic nervous system, allow me to calm the inflammation so that thereby I can go home and sleep better, so that I can go and perform better. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. And it seems like you guys have done a great job in, mindfully thinking through this product. One thing I'm very curious about is, has there been any data around whether or not taking these exogenous endocannabinoids affecting the anandamide pathways, down-regulating your body's production of endogenous anandamide agonists?
No, there hasn't. And I know that there's a lot of speculation on this, is if we continue to take these on a consistent basis, are we impairing our body's natural ability to do just that? And so one of the things that I really talk about is kind of fat cycling. Not only is there no panacea out there, but I don't think that you should take something every day. I think that this is one of those perfect examples of, you should be cycling on and off on this. Try to kickstart your endocannabinoid system so that it can work, and then cycle off of this. Go, take 4 weeks on, take a couple of weeks off, really see how you feel.
Do you think that is a way it works? Like if I took it for a short amount of time, I may actually see an upregulation of the endocannabinoid system or the anandamide systems?
I do think so, yes. Now that's my own hypothesis, and there's not a lot of data to support that, simply because of the legality of CBD. There hasn't been a lot of research done to really, determine that. Not to mention there's not a test, right? What do you say? What test do you take to say, is my endocannabinoid system functioning properly? So right. A lot of this just becomes hyper speculative. And I often laugh. It's like, 50 years ago, we put a person on the moon, but now we're still talking about how does CBD impact a person's health and wellness. This is kind of the new frontier, but with like the omega quant test or lipid test, we can say, yes, this system is operating properly. We can look at numbers, we can look at data and say, how do we optimize something? With the endocannabinoid system, with some of these, it really does become speculative. And so it's about peeling back the layers and really looking at other diagnostic tests to determine whether or not this is something you should be taking consistently. But back to that, is my position is you shouldn't take anything. There's nothing you should take every single day except maybe vitamin C if you want to prevent scurvy.
Sure. Is there any difference in the delivery mechanism? So we've got obviously oils that people are taking with CBD. You could obviously smoke this stuff. You could obviously take it in edibles. As far as like its effect on the body, personally, I'm someone who'd rather, like yourself, avoid the psychedelic benefit or a psychedelic effect. I don't want to be high all the time and feel like I can't speak or think. And that's just me personally, nothing against that. But is there any difference in as far as the way the CBD molecules and the phytocannabinoids work?
Not necessarily, but that is a great question. So what we find now, smoking is different, right? Because once you change the chemical structure of something by adding heat to it, that's a different component. But when you look at all the delivery systems, the edibles, the tinctures, the oils, all of that, one of the things that I always tell people is consistency is key, right? So those tinctures, which are the oils, they're usually cut with something, whether that's an MCT or an olive oil. The gummies are laughable in my book. But now you're seeing like chocolate bars or all of these things. So when you look at those, there's no way to stay consistent with how much you're taking every single day. You might get 5 milligrams one day, 50 milligrams the next. So how do you really titrate your dosages based off of how your body feels and how you understand this is working? So that's why I love soft gels as a delivery system, right? Everyone is tested for content uniformity. You know exactly how much you're getting. And then you can really address your titration based off of its impact, knowing that you're getting exactly what that package says you're getting.
One thing I noticed is there seems to be a lot of disparity from company to company, and people making claims saying this one's full spectrum, or maybe even saying, hey, this one only has this one particular strain of hemp. Is there any benefit to those ones that only have single strain or are really kind of narrowed down? Do we know?
No, and it becomes a purely hypothetical, hypothetical at best, anecdotal at worst conversation. What I think we do know is that personally, from the research that I've been able to come up with, the research that I've been able to participate in, is full spectrum from cannabis sativa. It really seems to be the way to go. Now, there might, like, again, if we look at the Epidiolex product, that's a CBD isolate, right? That's pure CBD. And I think the daily dosage is like 1,000 milligrams. It's a lot. So when we look at coming
It's
back,
very high from what I've noticed. Like most people are recommending like 100 to 200 milligrams, like high end.
high end, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's another issue that we need to talk about, right? Because one of the things that the CBD market has done, the whole medical marijuana market, it has brought all of the cowboys out. It's like there's a lot of money on the table, so everyone and their grandmother is getting into the CBD game.
Yeah.
So how do you separate or differentiate one CBD product from the next? And this is a question I get asked all the time. So I think the first thing you need to do is be able to, look at a product, look at a company and say, hey, I want to see your test results, right? What if you're a federal employee? What if your company does drug testing and you're taking a CBD product that you think is free of THC and it's not? Now all of a sudden your job is at risk. You've got some potential issues associated with that. So every product that is in this CBD world, you need to be able to look at and say, I know exactly what's in that. There's a lot of companies that don't do that claim, 0.3 THC, but have a lot more. And I know I've tried them, right? I've gotten some products where it was supposed to be low THC, legally compliant THC. I took it and I'm like, holy cow, I'm stoned to bejesus. And I'm not the first person that's had that experience. So when you really look at a CBD product, you have to be able to say, what's in this? Be able to look at a company's website and say, oh, okay, there are their test results. There are their independent third-party test results. You should be able to call up that company and say, I need to know what's in this. The second part of that is, really looking at a company who sells more than just CBD. And I think that there are a lot of great supplement companies, dietary supplement companies out there that have done the research, they've done the legal vetting, they've made sure that they've got good supply chains in place that really want to just add this as another element to their business, but they're not completely dependent on that CBD. So company that's all CBD, if they get shut down, they don't care. If you look at some of these bigger companies, and Omax is a perfect example, they've done such a great job of ensuring that that's just another option that they can give their customers to address specific health and wellness needs.
Very, very interesting, man. Any thought on how a customer, other short of going on the website and looking at like the assay of the product, any thought on how someone can differentiate? Like, how do we know?
That's really the challenge right now, right? It's I don't think that short of doing the research, you can know. I think that
do companies have to have full disclosure on their website? Is that something that's been mandated?
No, and that's the problem with the dietary supplement industry, right? And I think one of the big arguments that pharma is making is that we can control this 100%. We can ensure supply chain, we can do all, we can grow it, we can be involved in every aspect of it so that we know there's content uniformity or consistency with the end user. Right now, there's just so much out there, right? It's the gummies, it's the tinctures, it's, you can buy it on the web, you can buy it on, a local dispensary. There's no consistency in that whole process. So it really becomes essential for the average consumer to look at what they're putting in their body and make sure that they are 100% comfortable with the supply chain, the company, the testing, the assays, as you said. It's like you kind of have to do the legwork on this.
One thing I've seen that was a little bit disturbing, but I'm curious your opinion on this, is that a lot of people are giving this to kids. Any thought?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? I've got a 4-year-old daughter. So not only do I only create products that I'll take, but I only create products if it's a kid's product that I would give to her. Personally, I wouldn't give CBD to my daughter. Now, you look at Charlotte's Web, you look at Epidiolex, and you look at the fact that childhood epilepsy is a real thing. And
Sure.
There is a great deal of research around CBD having a positive impact on that epilepsy.
Sure.
If that's the case, and you're working with a medical practitioner on that, then I think absolutely. But if you're like, my kid's just spastic, I'm like, go put them on a treadmill, get them outside and let them play. CBD is not an answer for a kid unless there's something very real and tangible that you're trying to treat.
Awesome. Now, so you just brought something up that kind of spurred a thought in me is, could you just walk through what you know of to be the data-driven, verified effects, positive benefits of CBD? So I'm going to guess speculatively, and I don't know this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the fact that it's working on seizures, it's probably having some benefit to neural inflammation, decreasing neural inflammation.
Correct. And that's the impact of those CB1 receptors located predominantly in the brain. So we do know that.
So then, but sorry, I just want to get, I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry. It's working on the CB1 receptors, but CBD isn't working on those receptors. It's just somehow influencing the receptors.
It seems to be influencing those receptors. Yeah. Which is again, it's very speculative, right? So anyone who, I always say, I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus, but anyone who says this is exactly what it does. No, we just don't know. We don't have enough testing. Yeah. It does seem to indirectly impact the CB1 receptors in the brain, which control a whole host of things. Neural inflammation is one. We see a lot of impact on appetite, right? People who are binge eaters are taking CBD and not having, those same cravings. We look at sleep, we look at some of those other things. So even the way that pain is communicated throughout the body seems to be predominantly in the brain. So then as people are taking this full spectrum phytocannabinoids, pain seems to be modulated to the point that we're actually seeing it being used to help wean people off of opioids, which is kind of fascinating, right? So we know it seems to work with these indications. The concrete, definitive, 100% tested, validated mode of action on how it does, it still remains to be seen.
Do you know if any scientist has differentiated between which active compound is influencing CB1 versus CB2?
So there's a couple different ones on that one, but I think the CBD directly, and then there's like CBDA, CBDAG. There's all these different ones. Those seem to have the greatest impact on the CB1 receptors in the brain. That
would be a cool thought, right? Is if we can differentiate, like, hey man, these ones influence your brain, these ones influence your body. Depending what your objective is, you can take this one versus that one. I'm sure someone's trying to hash that out.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that a lot of these companies are really looking at is how do you separate those out and then put them back together so you can focus on things like that. And I think the next 3 to 5 years is going to be an incredibly fascinating time in this industry because we're going to get to see the research and then the end result of that research. I know I'm working on a couple of different clinical trials right now with CBD just on the impacts of stress and sleep. So we'll have definitive, validated FDA-approved biomarker response to stress. How does this really impact these things? And then we can start to extrapolate, well, what can we do from there by, again, pulling it apart and putting it back together.
Very, very cool, man. Evan, thank you so much, man. I'm very, very grateful for your time and your wisdom. And where can our listeners learn more about you?
The best place is on Instagram, which only just don't do it first thing in the morning or last thing at night. You can track me at Evan_Demarco there. Also, the Life to the Max blog is a great place. So there's a lot of research that we're posting there, a lot of research, just some blog posts that I've done on how you can really incorporate this into your health and wellness journey. So those are the 2 places that I'd recommend you find me.
Awesome, man. And I would absolutely love it if you could fire that research over so we can link to it in the show notes and definitely be sending some people your way. And if you want to give a shout out to Omax and where they can find the product with the CBD and omega-3.
Yeah, omaxhealth.com. Check it out there. It's like I said, it's one of those things. I'll be happy to send you some, Ben. Take a look at it, see what you think. It's it's one of those. I always love love people to give feedback, but Omax Health is definitely going to be your place to find these products.
Thanks, man. I'll tell you what, I'll try it. I'm definitely a healthy skeptic, and I'm also willing to do self-experimentation before I recommend a product. So yeah, man, that sounds great. And I'll definitely give you my unadulterated feedback.
Love it.
Thanks, Evan. Really appreciate your time, man.
Thanks, Ben. Great being on here.
Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Ben Pakulski and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.